folks, Dr. Mike Israel here for Renaissance Period Edition RP Plus and RP University, lecture number 3, Fat Loss Nutrition, Timing, Food Comp, and Supplements for Fat Loss. A lot of subjects, but luckily all of these, remember, on the diet priority pyramid take up not so much space. Altogether, they take up a total of 20%. So, it makes sense that calories and macros, we spent quite a bit of time on. A little bit of a shorter lecture, but nonetheless, some really good nuances to get through. So today we're going to be talking about nutrient timing basics for fat loss. Then for composition, we'll be tackling proteins, carbs, fats. We'll talk about fat loss supplements and a little bit on hydration for fat loss. And turns out that's not that big of a deal. All right, so let's get right into it. Nutrient timing basics for fat loss. Because fat loss occurs on basically a daily caloric deficit, a lot of nutrient timing doesn't have so much to do with fat loss as it has to do with muscle mass preservation. So if our fractional breakdown rate, FBR, the rate at which muscle is lost or broken down, is elevated, this is a bad thing. It's something we don't want to happen much at all, right? And potentially when we elevate fractional synthetic rate for muscle post-workout for a couple of days, to the extent that it's elevated, it should be supplied by amino acids because that's taken opportunities to grow that muscle. So if anything, we put on muscle during our fat loss phase, but at the very least, we can grow some muscle so that when we lose it at various other points in the fat loss diet, there's a balance there and we end up not losing any net muscle. So two concerns: we want to keep breakdown of muscle as little as possible. We want to supply muscle growth as much and at every opportunity as we can so that we can balance out the growth with the losses and end up at least, sort of neutral in that. The thing is, anything less than about 4 meals per day, 3 meals for sure, definitely 2, absolutely 1, is going to lead to a lack of coverage for FBR, which means that when we have opportunities for muscle breakdown to occur, there are neither the carbohydrates nor the amino acids to prevent that from occurring, right? So if you eat very infrequently, you're full for a while, which is really good, and then you're actually empty for a while too. And when you're really running on empty and you don't have amino acids coming in from the GI tract, if you were prone to losing muscle at that time, which on a hypocaloric diet you sort of kind of always are, then if you don't have that counterbalance of amino acids in the bloodstream, or at least carbs, real bad deal, and you end up losing some muscle. Like, it's not a ton, but it definitely adds up over the long term. As to say, okay, so the more meals we can have, the better. Well, anything above 7 meals probably backs into its own digestion. Would eat a chicken breast with some other food, and that's 3 to 4 hours of amino acids in the bloodstream, no problem. So if you're eating 10 times a day, it's kind of like, there's tons of overlap occurring. So probably 7 meals or something like that is a top end to make sure that we're getting more or less amino acid exposure almost all the time. And thus 4 to 7 meals per day is a recommended intake. Can we get super technical and drive a really hard bargain of what are the costs and benefits between 4 and 7? Yeah, sure. Inside the scope of this particular course, 4 to 7 is just fine. 7 is probably for folks that train multiple times a day, have real exotic needs, or prepping for shows. And then 4 is probably for folks just interested in general fat loss, maybe a little bit of activity, maybe train once a day, so on and so forth. And all right, so we got the meal number down, but how are those meals clustered? I mean, you can have 4 meals, every meal 2 hours apart for just like 6 hours of the day or 8 hours of the day. And then what do? Like, you're just done eating or something like that? Well, it's that's an interesting way to do it, but probably because we want to keep fractional breakdown rates sort of attended to at all times, the anti-catabolism function of protein, we want a rough, even spread of meals, right? We want most of the meals to occur at an even spread so that we are covering as much of the day as possible with meals. So that, because protein is so critical to, fulfilling fractional synthetic rates when the opportunity occurs and into muting fractional breakdown rates, along with carbs, of course, what a roughly even spread of protein throughout each meal. So basically, if you have 200 grams of protein that you want to take in, and you're taking in 4 meals a day, you should probably have around 50 grams of protein at each meal, and make sure the meals occur 5 hours apart or something like that, 4 or 5 hours. And then that way you get most of the day covered, and there's never really a time when you're super low on amino acids, except for maybe towards the tail end of when you sleep. And that's about it. So a pretty good start there. What about carbs? So carbs are really important pre-workout, especially on a fat loss phase. Because on a fat loss phase, you generally have pretty low blood glucose, which is good because that means your fats have to be essentially pushed into your bloodstream to attend to the low blood glucose not feeding all the rest of your body. Awesome. Burns fat. But it doesn't exactly leave you with a ton of workout energy. So if you have a time to eat carbs at any time of the day, pre-workout is a real good time to eat your carbs because it probably maximizes how much effort you can put in your workout, stimulus, anabolism, and anti-catabolism, and all that other good stuff. So for your weight training workouts and sport-specific workouts, when you're losing fat, pre-workout carbs are really, really, really important. So if you have 100 grams of carbs to spare, maybe like 30 to 50 of them should just go right into the pre-workout meal. Real good idea. During the workout, if you have long workouts and they're performance-oriented, like let's say you train CrossFit competitively for 2 hours a day, having intra-workout is really, really good on a fat loss diet because it means like when you are normally fatiguing and you'd really be extra fatiguing if it was a fat loss diet, you have those carbohydrates to really boost you. As a matter of fact, intra and workout and pre-workout carbohydrates are even included in a lot of ketogenic diets where it's like targeted ketogenic diet, where during the training, you're not actually in ketosis. You get all the benefits of carbs then, and then you're in ketosis the rest of the time. So it's that powerful that even people who are very, very convinced that keto is a really good idea, not big fans of carbs, even they use carbs for some of these purposes. Now, if you are doing workouts that aren't so crazy, they're not longer than an hour, and hunger is a real factor for you, like you don't want to be any hungry on your diet, then you probably don't want to take carbs and put them into your workout, or as many of them. Why? Because any amount of carb you put in via just shake or powder in your workout, I mean, those carbs, like, you're not hungry during your workout anyway because you're working so hard, and, they're not exactly filling carbs anyway, so they're kind of just, I don't want to say wasted carbs, they definitely get used for workout, but boy, they just don't have a real anti-hunger effect. Like, it's not when you need anti-hunger, and it's the worst kind of anti-hunger as a Gatorade, geez, barely fills you at all. So instead of doing 35 grams of Gatorade during your workout, if you're experiencing hunger, take that 35 grams of carbs and throw it in fresh fruit or veggies for your meal post-workout or the meal after. Gee, that's a huge anti-hunger hit. And the macros are the same, calories are the same, so you get the same results as far as weight loss, probably really similar fat loss results, but you'll have like double or triple the anti-hunger effect for that meal. So if hunger is a big factor, I would say the intra-workout carbs are some of the first things to get cut if carbs are getting cut. Post-workout carbs, really good idea. More of those go to glycogen than otherwise would, and less go to fat. And there's some good recent research to back that up. So, if you're going to eat carbs at any part of your day and you want to reload glycogen, which is excellent for a bunch of things, and you want to less to fat because you're trying to burn fat, eating them pre, maybe during, like we talked about just now, and post-workout in several meals is probably a good idea. Keeping carbohydrates either to trace levels or lower in other meals way before your workout or way after is probably best practice. Now, typically, you would keep your fats low around the workout window because that prevents digestive difficulties and prevents the carbohydrates from getting to where they need to be ASAP. The thing is, like, for super high calories, that's definitely a concern. When you're eating low calories, especially low enough, it's not much of a concern. First of all, you don't have that many fats to eat. And second of all, even if you have some fats, it's just not enough to really make a huge difference and make you sick. That being said, if you have 20 grams of fat to move around through the day somewhere where all of it's embedded with other protein and trace carb sources, I probably wouldn't eat it before the workout. It offers no energy advantages. It just delays stuff, could make you even a little sick, even on a fat loss phase. But sort of best case scenario is just kind of pissed away. It's wasted. Just remember, you're not hungry during your workout anyway. Saving fat for later in the evening or earlier in the morning when you can have a nice big meal, plenty of protein, plenty of fat, real anti-hunger kind of meal, especially before, as one of your later meals of the day. It can help you relax in the evening and help you go to sleep. Probably best to save your fats for that and not just jam them into the workout window. On that note of helping you sleep, the nighttime meal or whatever meal you eat last before you go to sleep should probably be pretty high in protein, maybe even a little higher than the other meals, because we want to dope out the protein as you sleep to prevent muscle loss from occurring, and it should probably be slower digesting, so something like cottage cheese, if anyone eats that shit anyway. Fuck eats cottage cheese, it's awful. Awful. I used to eat cottage cheese in high school to try to get jacked. It worked, but a terrible price to my sanity. Greek yogurt, which is sweet. The Greeks definitely a better people than the cottage people, where the fuck that cheese comes from. And basically, that stuff like that, casein is an excellent, or just right to the source, slow digesting protein, really good idea. And if you want to eat like just regular proteins and with a little more fat to slow digest them, that's totally fine. All right, moving right along. That's nutrient timing. So that's it, basically. 4 to 7 meals per day. Spread your protein sources evenly. Have your carbs clustered around, especially pre-workout, maybe during, some good deal of them after, less everywhere else. And then get your fats just spread out away from the workout. If you're really struggling with hunger, you can move some of your carbs towards, and probably all your fats too, or most of them, into later in the evening. And what that ends up doing is keeping you nice and full in the evening, where most people struggle with hunger. Now, if you're mostly hungry in the morning, move more of your carbs to the morning. There's definitely an individual thing. I will say this, and we'll get to this down a little bit. Sleep has so far been implicated in having an unbelievably important role in the fat burning and muscle retention process. If you're not getting enough sleep or good sleep, you'd be pissing away pounds of muscle over the months and not even knowing it. Like, you might even feel like pretty okay, but even a little bit of sleep loss or sleep quality loss is a bad deal. So where are we going with this? If having more food in the evening helps you sleep, right? And because you sometimes have trouble sleeping if you're hungry or you're waking up, stuff like that, gee, that's a bad deal. So if more food helps you sleep, forget a lot of that stuff, or just modify it to bias the food a little bit more, specifically the carbs and fats, to closer to bedtime. When you get to bedtime, you'll be nice and full, and you'll go to bed, you'll have a great night's sleep, you'll wake up, you're going to be running and gunning and, living a lean life early in the morning, right? But then another good benefit is psychologically, you can always look forward to the fact that, the toughest part of your day is the morning, which a lot of people aren't hungry anyway, but, once you get through the morning, get your workouts in, blah, 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 and as the day goes on, you get more and more food, which is psychologically way easier. I'll put it to you this way. It's not for everyone, just an idea. If we use the opposite paradigm, it's kind of tough. Like, if you eat most of your food in the morning and then progressively starve more and more as night comes up, gee, that's tough just psychologically, thinking like, as you're eating your morning food, be like, better enjoy this now because it's all going away in a couple of hours. Like, that's really tough to deal with. Whereas front loading the hard stuff tends to work better for more people. It doesn't mean that it's going to work better for you. It's something to give some thought. So, on to protein composition. Here's the deal. Higher quality proteins are simply better for everything we need proteins to be, as far as supplying muscle growth and preventing muscle loss, and so on and so forth. So that means dairy, which includes whey. Egg proteins are superior. Meats are great. They're right up there. Complete vegan sources like soy, seitan, mycoprotein, or corn, as it's also called, they're good. Not quite as good as meats, but pretty comparable. Then you get complementary proteins I guess quinoa is complete, but complementary proteins is like, beans and rice and stuff like that. They're decent. Quinoa is pretty good, but its bioavailability is not all that great. So it's not the most amazing protein sources in the world, but you can get by with some of them. Incomplete plant proteins are very meh. So you might have noticed that, your whole grain bread can have like 5 grams of protein in it. You're like, sure, that's a lot of protein. I would probably count only half of that at most, because it has such a hard time digesting and such a poor amino acid profile that it doesn't spare muscle loss. It does that okay. It definitely doesn't cause muscle growth nearly to the extent that you would expect for 5 grams of whey protein or 5 grams of beef protein or something like that. So definitely, if you're, into the vegan lifestyle, which is totally cool, then, making sure you get the higher quality proteins preferentially is probably a good idea. Now, got a couple of other tips here for vegans or people just trying to eat less animal products. First is you want to try to eat maybe not a gram per pound, but more like 1.5 grams per pound of protein per day. Now, this is a big conundrum, right? Especially for very serious vegan athletes, of which there's a growing number. 1.5 grams of protein from vegan sources is just hard, right? Like, there's good supplements, there's good foods, but you got to be pretty regimented. Like, if you're a meat eater, that's just open and close your eyes and boom, 1.5 grams per pound is gone. But if you are not a meat eater, and if you don't even eat any animal products at all, it's tough. It's possible, right, through a combination of sources, but it's going to have to require some work. And some people say, do I really need that much? On a fat loss phase, you will benefit from it. Absolutely. And the thing is, the huge moral benefits of veganism, they're not free, right? So if you're really serious about reducing or stopping animal suffering, you're going to have to eat 1.5 grams per pound per day of, seitan or mycoprotein or something like that. And it's not going to be amazing. It's just, a lot of it's tough to digest, but it's got to be worth it if your athletic performance is number one to you. And a really good way to do that is to supplement with a high quality powder protein, of which there are many for vegans. And, supplements are real easy. Just with 1 or 2 meals of the day, you put an extra scoop of vegan protein, which can be flavored like anything you want, and all of a sudden it's just not that hard to get nearly as much protein in. So an interesting way to do it is if you've been eating 1 gram per pound and you're vegan or vegetarian, and you're like, crap, I need to go up to 1.5 grams when I'm cutting to make sure that I don't lose too much muscle, you just buy a protein supplement and have it with like 2 meals, 25 grams each time or something like that. Boom, you're golden. There's your 1.5 grams per pound per day. Lastly, you really do want to change your diet or alter your diet to have more complete high-quality vegan proteins. Things like, again, soy, seitan, mycoprotein, quinoa, and less like counting up your protein from broccoli and bread and pasta, okay? That stuff counts, but it counts into the 1.5. It doesn't count as much as you would hope it would because it isn't fully digested. It's not ideal for absorption and transformation into muscle. So just you got to stay on top of stuff. If you're a vegan vegetarian, it's hard work. Next up, carb composition for fat loss. This one's actually super easy. Veggies, fruits, and whole grains are by far the best for health. And really good news is they're incredibly filling in that order, actually, and unbelievably great for keeping hunger at bay. Veggies are the most filling thing you can eat, period, of all foods. Fruits are a close second, fresh fruits, and whole grains are up there, probably comparable to protein. So, if you eat like a lot of like regular grains that are not, or processed grains, white bread, things like that, you're going to eat carbs and they're just kind of going to vanish and you're going to be like, I'm still hungry, right? But if you eat most of your carbs from veggies, fruits, and whole grains in that order, you can be real full, deep into a caloric deficit, lose fat without really suffering a whole lot, right? So really, when you start a fat loss diet or as you go through a fat loss diet, consider reducing processed carbs, various low-fiber carbs, and more as the diet goes on, you want to eat more veggies, more fruits, more whole grains, and less of the processed carbs, and so on and so forth. So stay away from the rice cakes as much and choose broccoli, spinach, kale, etc., strawberries, oranges, apples, things like that, maybe brown rice, whole wheat pasta, and that'll keep you way less hungry than normal if you ate, other foods as well. As far as your shakes, they're still supposed to be fast digesting because they're around the workout, but probably fewer shakes and more whole foods as hunger wears on. A lot of professional bodybuilders will take shakes out of their diet, just eat mostly whole food as they prep for shows. Why? Mostly because of hunger, right? Because if you just take a shake and you down it, you're like, oh, that was good. I could just eat as much food as possible. Remember, liquid's not that filling. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, geez, that's 250 calories I could have eaten in solid food and actually had an anti-hunger effect. Fat composition for fat loss. Real big first point here is that, remember, your essential fats are important. Now, when you're eating a eukaloric, isocaloric diet, especially when you're eating a hypercaloric diet, and you're getting enough calories, it's really super easy to get all the essential fats you need just through trace sources. But if you're on a fat loss diet, especially an extended one that lasts, more than 8 weeks, and if you're really doing multiple fat loss diets in a row with relatively short maintenance breaks, it's probably a good idea to get in some essential fatty acids. Especially omega-3s, because we don't seem to get enough of those in our diet usually. So maybe an EPA DHA supplement is a good idea. Maybe eating some fish maybe twice a week is a good idea, and rotating the different kinds of fish you take in. That's probably a good thing. Just keep you plugging along and keep all those benefits going. The good thing is you'll probably get enough saturated fats just through animal products if you're an omnivore. If you're going to eat extra fats, and look, like if you have 70 grams of fat to eat per day, you're 200 pounds, that's a totally reasonable amount even on a deficit. You might not get all those through EPA DHA supplements and through meats, because your meats might be super lean at that point. So you may want to eat fats on top of that. And then monounsaturated sources are probably the best, because every time they're tested, they have unbelievable health benefits. They actually lead to fat loss and stuff like that. It's really great. Anti-inflammatory effects, so on and so forth. So nuts, nut butters, olive oils, canola oils, avocados, so on and so forth. But big hint, and this should be covered in macros, but it's worth repeating, watch the amounts. And on the food palatability scale of how enticing something is and how much more of it you want to eat, like, the potato chip can't have just one effect. You got to really watch out for the nut butters, right? That's a little pro tip or whatever they say. Almond butter, peanut butter, even especially the natural ones are so delicious that if you start using them on your fat loss diet, it's just going to make you crave more. And there's something to be said, and we're not going to cover this because this is just a technical nutrition lecture. It's not covering adherence or anything like that. We've got other lectures for that. A big adherence tip is to not keep junk food in the home, because if you have junk food in the home, you're more likely to eat it during times of weakness, so to say. If you have peanut butter in the home, like crunchy natural peanut butter, boy, oh boy, it's not safe. And also, if you try to do the measuring scoop system for peanut butter, a lot of times just a little bit of an error is way more nut butter, way more calories, and you could be off by a considerable amount. As a matter of fact, early on in the Renaissance periodization company history, when we were coaching a lot of people and the first diet templates were out, we had to have like multiple posts on social media about this is what an actual scoop of peanut butter looks like when it's a tablespoon. It's not this, right? And it was just off by a little bit. One was double the calories of the other. And a lot of people found that very enlightening. And a lot of people are like, oh my God, no wonder I haven't been losing weight. So an interesting fat loss tip is tell someone to replace all their nut butters with regular nuts or oils, and they just start losing weight. And they're like, I guess the nut butters were inflaming me. Like, nope, you were just overeating them and you had no idea. So a big tip there. And, those monosaturated fats are good, but you probably won't have an opportunity to eat a ton of them. But if you do, they're a good place to get your fats. All right. Fat loss supplements. Not the longest list in the world because most supplements don't work. Whey protein, just like in a muscle gain lecture, whey protein works for your workout shake. I wouldn't use it too much outside of a workout shake because whey protein tends to be very quickly digesting, and has good anti-hunger properties while you eat it, but while it's digesting, but it just doesn't digest for very long. So sooner or later, you're left pretty empty. And another effective supplement is creatine, 2.5 grams per 100 pounds per day. So if you weigh 200 pounds, that's 5 grams per day. Timing of creatine is not important because it loads in your cells over about a week. And then you can just take it any time of the day and it loads just the same way. It keeps your cells topped off. So creatine is good. Creatine spares muscle and it improves performance. So on a variety of fronts, it's really, really good for fat loss phases. A real good tip for creatine is to introduce it the week before you start a fat loss phase so that you get your water weight gain. And then when you start measuring your weight, you can know that the creatine's already loaded and all the losses are going to be good. A lot of people start creatine when their fat loss phase starts. And they're going to be, like we talked about in the last lecture, they're going to be using their weight in order to figure out, how much do I change my macros? Like if the body weight's falling down, then it's good. And if it's not, it's not. Creatine makes you gain, anywhere from, 1 to 10 pounds potentially over the course of a week of just intramuscular body water. So imagine being just a 5-pound creatine gainer, starting creatine, and in the first you lose an actual 2 pounds. That's a very impressive loss of tissue in your first week. But you start creatine, so you gain a net total of 3 pounds. What are you supposed to do with your macros? Let's say it's 2 weeks later and you're just around the same weight that you started. Like you've technically gained a pound. What are you going to do? Cut your macros like crazy? Maybe they're already pretty low. If you're losing 2 pounds of tissue a week, that's just going to be a huge mistake. So start your creatine the week before. You'll reach a higher body weight, but then everything from there as you cut will be much more reflective of actual tissue losses versus body water shifts that creatine causes. Number 3, casein protein, really good meal replacement at night or for when you're on the go. It's slow digesting, so it has a really big effect on preventing fractional breakdown rates from getting too high. It's like it's almost like having an IV of protein or something like that. Really, really good thing. Of course, glycemic workout carbs, intra and post-workout, especially intra-workout. Not super important on a fat loss phase, but again, if you're doing sport training or really, really highly active training is very important to you, and it's a long training, it's very hard, those intra-workout glycemic carbs can be somewhat effective. Multivitamin. In a balanced diet that's isocaloric or hypercaloric, multivitamins are not actually super important because if you eat a variety of foods, you probably get all your vitamins and minerals just fine. Multivitamins can really help on a fat loss diet because might not be getting enough food, and you're never gonna, not never, you're very unlikely to get an actual shortage or deficiency of vitamins and minerals, but you could get into kind of a mini one, and that could affect a couple of things and just make your process not as great as it could have been. So good insurance policy is a multivitamin every day, and they're almost free, so that's not a big deal. Number 6, okay, and it's way higher than 6th rank in its impact. This isn't ranked list. Stimulants, okay. Stimulants have a variety, particularly caffeine is the quintessential stimulant. Stimulants do a couple of really great things specifically for fat loss phases. One, they have a really big anti-hunger effect. All right, so if you have a certain amount of stimulant, your hunger goes down. Almost for everyone. There's some small exceptions. Stimulants can give you the ability to focus on work. Which is really good because, a lot of times when you're on a fat loss diet, we all have day jobs, right? So if you're on a fat loss diet and the reason you stop adhering to it and cut it short is because you just can't be focused at work because you just don't have enough food to power your brain, that's going to interfere with the results of the fat loss diet. Like you might have wanted to lose 15 pounds over 3 months, but you had to stop with 10 pounds at 2 months because your body was just like, or your brain was like, I can't keep doing this. Like you're, at work, you're underperforming and you can't allow that to happen. If you take in caffeine, then your work focus can improve and you can consistently have good performance in the rest of your life so that your diet can keep going. And lastly, workout energy. Workout energy comes at a premium, which is why we eat a lot of pre-workout carbs on fat loss phases. Workout energy comes at a real premium when we are talking about fat loss phases, especially towards the end of fat loss phases. Getting in tough workouts can be a challenge. That's a two-part problem. One, if it's super challenging, you may not meet your criteria for training enough to keep the muscle on. And two, if you're really having trouble working out, you might not be doing enough cardio or enough physical activity to keep moving along. And actually on that work focus note, caffeine and other stimulants can keep your energy up throughout the day, which means your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, you're just burning through random daily activities, is going to be considerably lower. It would be higher if you took in a stimulant. So a stimulant can not only have you have more energy during weight training to save muscle loss, during cardio to burn fat, but also the rest of the day to keep fat burning and calorie burning a good thing. So stimulants are a big deal. We'll have a couple of tips for them in just a sec. Lastly, EPA, DHA subs, right? These are omega-3 supplements. There's a question mark next to that one because it's not really clear that they have these huge advantages. Might be something to throw in, though, and experiment with because there's a lot of potential there. Hydration. This entire presentation has hydration, just one line for it. Just don't mess it up big time. Regularly consume fluids. Make sure your urine is off yellow in color on average, and you're good to go, right? Hydration is not magic, but if you chronically underhydrate, it's just going to give you more problems, more headaches, more of all this stuff. A hydration tip is before every meal in which you're hungry, have like 1 or 2 glasses of water and your stomach fills up temporarily. And then when you eat that meal, you actually get fuller faster. So that's a tip. So if you're chronically chronically a little bit less hydrated than you could be, you might actually be getting hungrier than normal. So give that some thought. And of course, your performance, you want to maximize during a fat loss phase because it's tough. Hydration can be a factor to maximize your performance at least as much as it'll take. If you're under calorie, you can perform a certain level pretty well hydrated. Not the greatest, but pretty decent. If you're under calories, which is a given for fat loss phases, and you're dehydrated, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. So you might as well take care of business there. All right. Lastly, a few really important tips on stimulant use, and we'll talk about stimulant cycling later in the lecture on how to actually change these variables as your body adapts through the fat loss phase. If you're using stimulants chronically to keep you awake, unless you're a shift worker or you're a crazy rotation through residency as a doctor or something, that is not a good idea. If you're sleep deprived, the sleep deprivation is the issue. Can stimulants keep you upright and functioning while you're sleep deprived? Yes, they do that incredibly well. The thing is, you burn just as much muscle and prevent just as much fat loss, which are two things sleep deprivation does, if you're on stimulants or if you're off stimulants. So it's really, in the literal sense of the term, from a body composition perspective, masking the problem. So people say, like, I need my Diet Coke, otherwise I'll fall asleep, or I need my coffee, otherwise I'm just asleep in the middle of the day. That's a bad thing. You should be able to stay awake without stimulants. Can you use them to enhance your wakefulness and be a super productive, cyborg? Totally, but you should still be a human being without them, right? It's some of you using stimulants, that sounds like crazy talk. I promise it has validity to it, right? So if you're using stimulants to stay awake, you need to fix your sleep, period. But if your sleep is decent, that's fine. You can use stimulants on top of that. When you start using stimulants, or whatever amount of stimulants you're using at the beginning of your fat loss phase, you can work up as needed as the fat loss phase goes on. What does that mean? If you use pre-workout, maybe don't use the whole 2 scoops of Ronnie Coleman's 550 milligram of caffeine pre-workout at the beginning of a fat loss phase, because then what are you going to do at the end of a fat loss phase when energy is even lower? Gee, I mean, you might not be doing anything at all, right? You can't take like 1,200 milligrams of caffeine at the same time. You're going to end up at the hospital, so there's no room to grow. Maybe start off with like a diet Mountain Dew before a workout, 30 minutes before workout, 15 minutes before, and at the beginning of your, pre-workout, at the beginning of your diet. And then later move up to like a Mountain Dew Code Red diet or something with more caffeine. And then later go to half a scoop of Ronnie Coleman's Signature Series supplements. And then after go to a full scoop or something. So you ramp up the caffeine in that for the rest of your life as well. Maybe you have a cup of coffee per day or a cup of tea when you start your day every day normally. When you start your fat loss diet, maybe bump that up to 1.5 cups, right? And then eventually to 2 cups, and then eventually to 3 cups or 4 cups a day at the very end of your diet, and then taper back off. So, if you start full bore with as much caffeine as your body can handle at the beginning of a diet, there's just no flex there for when the diet gets tougher. Yeah, you got a good effect the entire time, but ideally you want to dose your effect. As the diet goes on, you want to dose it accordingly. And last tip here, watch your stimulant timing. Because if your sleep is affected by stimulants, that's a bad deal. Remember, they keep you awake. So if you have a workout at 5 p.m., you might want to take enough stimulants to get you through the workout, but not so much stimulant that you're like buzzing about at 12 a.m. and you watched all of YouTube already, because that's going to interfere with sleep and have all these other bad consequences. I will say that one of the more difficult problems is for people who get off work late, or for whatever reason their schedule is such that they can only train at like 8 or 9 p.m. They come home, they have one meal, they relax, and they go to sleep. Stimulant use should be minimal in those individuals, or basically as much stimulant as you can handle without having sleep problems. So it shouldn't be a rocket science problem to you where you're like, all right, I took 600 milligrams of caffeine at 8 p.m. I did my workout, and it's 3 a.m. and I'm not falling asleep. I wonder why. It's the stimulants. So make sure you have just the amount of stimulants you need to, that little golden zone between get yourself a good workout, good enough, and not so many that you stay awake at night. And honestly, if you train really late at night, consider switching workout, potentially switching a schedule to train earlier. That could be a solved problem for you. I think that's it. Yep. Next time, we're going to talk about how long you should be losing fat for, and how much fat you can lose or how much weight you can lose at any given time to be safe and effective. And we're going to talk about how to measure progress. Folks, see you then.